In early February of 2016, Apple was served with a court order that was initiated by the FBI. The attack had occurred in California the previous December, in which 14 individuals were killed and 24 were injured. One of those attackers had an Apple iPhone 5C that the FBI wanted to examine. 6 weeks prior to the attack, the attackers had actually turned off the online backup feature, so the phone's contents were no longer copied to Apple's iCloud. Thus, the relevant data was only contained on the phone itself. The owner of that phone, which was the San Bernardino County Department of Public Health, granted permission to the FBI to search the phone's contents. Older versions of Apple's phone operating system, Apple had the ability to bypass the user's passcode so that Apple could essentially unlock the device and access data on the phone. And it had done so dozens of times over the years, pursuant to a court order. But with newer versions of the iOS operating system, like that found on this phone in question, Apple securely encrypted the data on the phone by default. All the photos, messages, contacts, call histories, everything was encrypted the user selected passcode, and Apple could not bypass to obtain the data. Apple really had 4 protections built into their phones. The first protection, as we mentioned, was the passcode. This could be like a 6-digit passcode, a 4-digit numeric code, etc. The passcode on the Apple iPhone really serves 2 functions. First function was it was used to authenticate access to the phone. To say, it prevented someone from picking up my phone and opening it up, seeing what's there, reading the contents of it. It was thus used as authentication. The second purpose of the passcode was this passcode was also used to create a cryptographic key that allowed the data on the phone to then be encrypted or decrypted. Second protection that Apple had on their iPhones was simply a timeout. To prevent someone from picking up the iPhone and just randomly guessing what my passcode is, Apple had delays built in. I could enter 4 incorrect attempts with no penalty, but then when I tried to enter attempt number 5, I actually was forced to wait 1 minute. If it was incorrect, then I had to wait 5 minutes before I could make attempt number 6, and so on down the line. This was obviously to prevent someone from picking up my phone and just trying to randomly guess what my passcode was. The protection that Apple had built in was wipeouts. The iPhone could be configured that it would essentially wipe out the entire contents of the device after 10 failed passcode attempts, so it would then be permanently inaccessible. And the fourth protection Apple had was delays. Each time a password, a passcode was entered, it took 80 milliseconds for the system to process a password to determine if it's correct. Now, of course, this would prevent someone from very quickly entering new passcodes to try over and over, because they only could guess a password, a passcode, every 80 milliseconds. Prohibitively long in order for me to try to continually guess passcodes. That's because with this 80-second time limit, I only could enter 8 or 9 guesses each second. So these 4 protections help to protect this phone in question from the FBI. So the FBI said to Apple, "We need your help." The FBI went to a court and compelled Apple to create custom iPhone firmware that would not only remove the delays we talked about, but also prevent the device from wiping its entire contents clean after 10 incorrect attempts. In addition, the FBI wanted Apple to develop the firmware so that they could do this, what was called a brute force passcode guess attack, through the iPhone's physical device port or Bluetooth or Wi-Fi connection. That simply means that Apple didn't have to hire someone to laboriously type on the Apple keypad the guesses in order to enter the phone. But Apple said no. FBI may use different words to describe this tool, Apple says, but make no mistake, building a version of iOS that bypasses security in this way would undeniably create a backdoor. And Apple refused to do so. They said they would appeal this court order, and we'll go all the way to the Supreme Court if necessary, Apple said. 21st, the FBI asked a judge to postpone the court hearing between Apple and the FBI. The FBI said an outside party demonstrated a method for unlocking the attacker's phone, and we're testing it. FBI had actually received several different suggestions, but in this request to postpone, the FBI didn't say which suggestion, which possible method they were using. A week later, the FBI asked the court to completely drop the order. No longer requires the assistance from Apple, they said. Exactly how the FBI was able to crack the iPhone, but most likely it had to do with a cloning technique called NAND mirroring. The memory chip from the iPhone was removed, placed into a chip reader program device, and then the contents were copied. And we could make multiple copies of it. We could make a copy of the iPhone's memory. I could make my attempts at trying to guess the passcode on it. If it locked up, no problem at all. I simply would move on to the next copy of the contents of memory. Now, we then had kind of a turnabout here because Apple refused to give the FBI the help it wanted. Then Apple turned around and wanted the FBI's assistance. Apple wanted to know, how did you break this? And the attorneys for Apple researched some legal tactics. They wanted to compel the FBI to turn over the specifics. Now, of course, the FBI could say that we have a non-disclosure agreement with this third party that helped us crack the phone, and we can't say anything. Or they simply could say our investigation is not complete. And legal experts said that government really faces no obvious legal obligation to provide this information to Apple. So the result of this is that there's really kind of some fallout going on here. Apple now kind of faces the problem that they are in the position in which their iPhones, which they claim to be very secure, we have an example here of one that's being broken, and the federal officials have refused to identify how it was broken. And Apple, of course, can't get the phone back to reverse engineer how it was broken. As one individual said, Apple is a business. It has to earn the trust of its customers. It needs to be perceived as having something that can fix this vulnerability as soon as possible. Well, why in the world are we talking about all of this in the context of cryptography? That's because this San Bernardino iPhone event, which truly has been the major technology news so far of 2016, has put cryptography squarely in the bullseye of the public today. There has been much said, written, and talked about cryptography in terms of its protections, how it's used, and how it should be used. And that leads us to our webinar today on the basis of cryptography. We're going to look at the fundamentals of cryptography and how it can be used for keeping our data secure from attackers. We'll do an overview of encryption techniques and some practical methods for using cryptography. And essentially, we'll look at cryptography and its unique terminology. We'll look at the three different categories of cryptography. We'll pause and talk about some basic issues surrounding cryptography in our world today, and then we'll conclude with how cryptography can practically be used. And we will look at how to securely make your iPhone or Android device so that no one can actually get into it. By